All right, hello. It is Thursday, December 8th at 12 noon Eastern Time, and this is Marketing Live. I am your host, Amy Jorgensen. On today's live broadcast, we're talking about access denied, keeping yourself off an attacker's radar. Marketing Live is part of a HigherEd Live network, offering viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Live broadcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. Today's live viewing experience is powered by Maestro, the premier marketing tech platform for broadcasters. All episodes of Marketing Live are free and accessible in the video archives at higheredlive.com and in podcast format on iTunes. HigherEd Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Paul Gilzo. Hello, Paul.
Hello, from Missouri.
From the University of Missouri. That's right. That's awesome. We're so excited to have you join us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
And Paul's presentation in the topic that we're talking about was ranked as the best presentation at HigherEdWeb in, was it October 2016? So
yes,
it's pretty awesome. I'm so excited to have you on our on HigherEd Live right now. So, all right, great. So for anyone who's watching along and does want to ask questions, you can use hashtag HigherEdLive, and I'll do my best to ask them to Paul as they come in. So let's start off with malware. So what is it? Why should we care about it?
All right, so malware is going to be any software that is intended to damage or disable or some way impede your computer system. In the past, it was more localized to your computer. What we're seeing now, though, is malware being distributed amongst many computers, and then those computers being used to launch attacks. So if you if you noticed any slowness in the internet 2 or 3 weeks ago, or were unable to access like Netflix and Amazon, that was a botnet attack against one of the major DNS hosts that had been, what happened was the remote cameras were infected with malware that then took them over, and then they were used to launch that attack. So you need to care, because as we connect more and more things to the internet, this type of attack is going to become more and more prevalent.
Holy cow. So it slows stuff down and it goes into all the information, and holy cow.
Yeah, so essentially what you have is you have hundreds of thousands of systems that are now controlled and that are sending requests to a single system or a single collection of systems, and it's just way more information than they can possibly respond to. And so you overwhelm that system and take it down. Or if you've heard of a distributed denial of service attack, that's what this was.
Yeah, I think that happens when I ate too much Thanksgiving turkey. It's just my system started breaking down.
That's right, exactly.
All right, so when it comes to this, are HigherEd websites, are they more or less susceptible depending on what they're developed in? Are we attractive to folks that are going to want to go in there and...
Absolutely, yes. In fact, I would argue that higher ed sites are extremely attractive to attackers, because if you think about it, even those institutions that are not research institutions have a ton of hardware resources on their networks. You've got, even if you're not a research institution, you've got thousands of student machines on the network, faculty machines, staff machines, and more of your faculty, staff, and students are bringing these connected devices onto the network. If you are a research institution, you probably have your own data center or connected to data centers, which have thousands of machines. So we just have a ton of hardware resources. We also provide internet access to all of our students and faculty and staff. And so we have just an amazing amount of capacity and uptime, and all those things are extremely attractive to attackers. Further complicating matters is that higher ed, unfortunately, is fairly limited in those human resources. Mm-hmm. So we just don't have enough human bodies managing equipment, watching the networks, monitoring the networks for traffic, for unusual traffic. And so attackers know this. They know that we're not able to keep up with all the technology that we possess to the point to be able to secure it all and make sure that we're monitoring it. So yeah, I'd say we are extremely attractive to attackers.
Yeah, and I mean, just thinking, I know that at most of the universities I've worked at, we've worked with independent contractors to help develop our website in the first place. So even if they did attack, because the coding was done in other places, it'd be super hard for us to, dive in there and try to fix stuff. Or a lot of folks just don't have the knowledge on how to do that in the first place.
Right, yeah. So you might have a vendor develop a site for it and hand it over, but the person they hand it over to might not be trained in what to look for, how to fix things, secure coding practices, any of that. In the presentation, I often talk about, how many people you have heard of, the administrative assistant who's told that he or she is going to manage this site as, 10% of their job is that other duties is assigned. And it puts them up to fail. It sets them up to fail because they have not been given the training. They've not been given the skills necessary to properly maintain and manage these things. And again, attackers know this. They know our situation. They know our scenario that we've got going on here, and they're going to utilize that for their attacks.
Yeah, this is not a 10% kind of a job. Like managing a website and making sure that you're staying secure, and even just content management is way more than what a lot of people acknowledge. So that's really good to know.
Well, and people don't think about, unfortunately, people don't think about WordPress, Joomla, Drupal, those systems as being applications. And these are applications, and applications can be exploited. It's completely different than the days when we were working in Dreamweaver and we were doing static HTML. In that case, you really can't attack that application because there was no application. You would attack the servers themselves, which were usually handled by another system or another group on campus. So, if you were the administrative assistant, you didn't have to worry about protecting the servers, and you really didn't have to worry about protecting your site because there was nothing in the site that could be exploited. Now, with everybody moving to CMSs of some sort, like Expression Engine, Drupal, WordPress, those are applications, and those have holes that can't be taken advantage of.
So this is a perfect transition. So how do we protect those holes?
Oh, well, that's exactly what I talk about in the presentation. So one of the big things I talk about in the presentation, and again, I focus, if you watch the presentation, you go back and watch it, I do focus on WordPress. And I chose that because, WordPress now powers 27% of the entire internet. So it has an incredible market share. And from what I've seen in higher ed, that number's about the same in higher ed. Most higher ed institutions have about 27% of their sites in WordPress if they're not fully WordPress. So across the industry, it's still about that same number. So that's why I focus on that. And what I talk about is what is called black box scanning. And black box scanning is reconnaissance. It's the easiest way to think about it. It's just reconnaissance. Going in and probing the site and beginning to look for fingerprints and signs of potential vulnerabilities, what the site is running, what they're using, if things are out of date, and that kind of thing. But it doesn't affect the site. It doesn't hurt the site in any way. It simply is requesting information. So one of the things that we can do is we can begin to limit that information that we are freely giving up. So one of the pieces we talk about is like most plugins, again, we focused on WordPress. Most plugins have a README file that comes with their plugin. Most systems are set up, if you were to go and ask in that directory for that plugin, if you were to ask for that README file, the server is going to freely give that back up. Why not? It's set up to give out files from that directory, to give out those things, and that's a valid file. It's a text file, so it gives that up. But in that README file is everything. It's what the plugin is, the version that it is, all that information. So if you're running an out-of-date plugin, I can request that file, and now I know you're running that plugin and that it's out of date. So part of what we talk about is, okay, well, let's shift that frame of thinking, and let's say, okay, let's not give away anything from our systems unless we specifically know it should be given away. So for WordPress, in that content directory where the plugins and the themes and the uploads are, let's not give away anything that isn't an image, that's not a CSS file or a JS file, a media file or a video. We're not going to give away anything that isn't something specific that we know should be given out. And that's one way that you can reduce that footprint or that information you're giving out, because now as somebody tries to probe your system, they're just going to be forbidden from getting any of those types of pieces of information. They're only going to get those things that you want them to have.
How do you do that? Do you do that within the plugin? Do you do that on the server?
You do that on the server.
Yeah.
Most systems, I shouldn't say most systems, Apache, Linux, that powers a big chunk of the web. So in the presentation, I give specific examples for Apache, and you do it through an htaccess file. If you're running Nginx, there's examples there for you to be able to do that with Nginx. I don't use IIS. I know you can do the same in IIS. I just don't have those example files. But essentially, you're telling the server, in this area, don't give up this information. And that's a big piece of what we cover. I also discuss, in your login areas, should somebody in China be able to log into your system or even get to the login page? Probably not. If you're in the United States, you're probably going to be logging into those areas from the United States. Or we can go a step further. How many of our higher ed institutions have VPNs, virtual private networks? Well, if you have a VPN, we can further lock it down to say, okay, the login area is only accessible from campus network IP ranges and from our VPN ranges. And so then even if an attacker were able to get a compromised account, they're not going to be able to get to the login sections if they're not inside your network. So it's just one more step that we can add to prevent an attacker from being able to get to our stuff.
That's really smart. And I love that you're bringing this up because I think at the beginning, before we even started, you and I were talking about how here in the university I'm working in, the office I'm working in, I realized that on our website, all of our website information was made in this proprietary CMS, and it was held in a person's office. And in that person's office, it had all the student data on that server, it had all the students' information, and it actually got hacked. And they're like, oh my goodness, I'm like, yeah, and I found out through Google Analytics. So, I mean, the idea that someone's going into all that stuff, especially from abroad, it happens all the time. I just got a notification from Michigan State University that they just got all their stuff hacked and that all the employee data and all the student data is shared with everybody, and it's a nightmare. So,
yes. I think the biggest problem in higher ed force, especially when it comes to security, is education. It's simply being aware of all the steps and all the things you need to think about. In the case of the server, if you have student information on that server should be in a locked, physically protected area so that no one can just walk in and take it, as well as locking that down to, again, campus network ranges so that nobody can connect to that system. Plus, just the need to secure the entire stack, so not just the web application that they were using in that proprietary CMS, but was the system itself hardened? Was the OS hardened? Was the web server hardened? If there was a database, was it hardened? You can go even further. Was the web server and the database server, was it on the same physical server? If so, those need to be separated. Again, isolating those from each other. And then locking those down so that you're further adding these layers. I talk a lot in my presentations. Both the one I did at HigherEdWeb is also I do an OWASP top 10 that I actually taught at the Academy before HigherEdWeb started, is this concept of defense in depth, where you add layer after layer after layer of defense, because it really is, it's an arms race with attackers. If they are absolutely determined to get into your systems, if they have enough time and resources, eventually they will get into your systems. There's just no way to fully secure anything. But if we can add these layers to slow them down, then what we want to do is eventually make them run out of resources before they finally get through.
I envision I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Incredibles, where it's like he's running and he's got those big black blobs that are being thrown on him, and he's like slowing down as he's going, but he's still progressing, and it's kind of like that. It's like you're making it harder for them to go do that. Okay, cool. So can you explain a little bit more about the black box and how we can set that up and how it works? I loved your analogy before we started. If you could do that again.
Which one? The airplane. Sorry. I was trying to remember which analogy I used. I use a lot. So it is. So there's a black box in an airplane. They often have, or they're starting to put them in cars as well, where the black box doesn't do anything to the system. It doesn't really interact with the car or the airplane. It's simply recording data. And so that later, if there is an accident, you can go back into the black box, you can pull that data and then see what happens. So it's similar in that with black box scanning, what we're doing is we're not affecting the server at all. We're not trying to penetrate. It's not like a penetration test. We are actively trying to get an exploit to execute. We are simply asking the server for information and then analyzing how the server responds and what information we can get back from it. In terms of the presentation that I did, the tool that I used was WP Scan, which is specific to WordPress. It's actually sponsored by Sakuri, who helps out an immense ton in the WordPress community. And again, you set it, you point it at a site, and it just asks questions. It says, hey, do you have this file available? Do you have this file available? Give me this file. And then it analyzes those files to determine what it is you're running, what version of WordPress, what plugins you're running, what themes you're running, what versions, and looks for a lot of interesting things. One thing that people will often do, so in WP config, that file, it has your salts, it has the database username, the database password, and sometimes what people will do if they have to change that file because they're worried about the changes they're making, they'll just rename it from .php to maybe .old or .bak. Yeah. It'll actually scan for those as well and say, oh, hey, do you happen to have, this is an old file, or this is a back file, or TMP, or swap. And if you do, because your system is set up to give those files out, unless you've already set it up to not do that, it'll just freely give that file back, and now those database credentials are revealed.
Yeah.
So you can use these tools. Anybody can use these tools. I mentioned before we started this that there are tools available. There's black box scanning tools for Drupal, for Joomla. Basically, if there's a system out there, there's probably a scanning tool available for you to use to kind of do this reconnaissance type work.
So are the people that are trying to come in and put malware and all that kind of shenanigans, could they use black box on our server, or is it?
It depends on the system. A lot of times what you'll see, the lower level stuff, is kind of like a splatter attack, where they're just throwing anything and everything at your server. They're really noisy. They're just going to say, I'm just going to bombard your server with every possible attack that I know of and see what happens. Maybe I'm going to get lucky. Target attacks, so if let's say your institution has proprietary intellectual property, or maybe you're doing some military research, and you've got a bigger player, a bigger attacker that's coming in, that in that targeted attack, they're going to spend a lot more time doing this type of reconnaissance to see where they can get in, and get in stealthily, quietly, let's use quietly and undetected, because they don't want you to know that they're getting in. And a lot of times our websites are popular attack targets for them, because if they can get in through a website, they've now got one step into the system. So if I can get on your web server, well, that server is usually behind the firewall, which behind the firewall, I now have access to other web servers, other database servers, other systems, and I can slowly begin to crawl and gather data on those sites and those systems, and then just continue my way into the system until I finally get to the target, that ripe data that I'm trying to get to.
I mean, you could get to student financial information, you could get to student addresses, and I mean, the financial information, you can see how much loans they have taken out, who they've taken out loans with. You could try to, take out additional loans on behalf of them. I mean, oh my goodness,
and not just students, but think about it. Your HR systems have all of the information on your staff and faculty.
My banking information.
And they have your social security number most likely somewhere, hopefully encrypted and not in plain text. But, I worked in a system, I built a system 10 years ago. Yeah, 10 years ago that collected social security numbers and had to be readily available. And so these legacy systems can still be out there. Somebody hasn't taken them down, rewritten them, and moved them to something more secure.
Convert everything to emojis is what you're telling me.
There you go. I like that. And have to reinterpret.
Just have a whole bunch of weird texting to try and confuse folks. So
I like it.
Okay, so if we implement the black box and it's going through and monitoring stuff and it's slowly creeping through and seeing where we do have vulnerabilities, what do we do at that point? How do we make sure that if we do see something that's susceptible, then we can go in and fix it. But how are we alerted to that? Are we just looking at giant amounts of files? Are these plugins making us aware?
So and I wish there was a good way to share pictures with you to show you what this looks like. Essentially, what you'll get is a report.
There's screen share in Hangouts.
Is there?
Yeah.
If I could I'd have to find the images.
It's okay. Yeah.
But essentially what you'll get is a report back. It'll say, okay, hey, I found this piece of data. I found this. So in mentioning that back TMP file that people done, it'll say, hey, I found this. And that's your warning. That's your trigger to go, oh, well, I need to go remove that. Or it might say, you've got directory listings enabled. And that's where if you go to a directory on a server that doesn't have an index file, it'll just display all the files in there. That's your warning to say, oh, we need to further lock down Apache or Nginx to not do that. And you can go turn those off. It'll go through and it'll list all the themes that you have installed and what version they are, all the plugins you have installed and the versions. So you can see, hey, I've got this plugin that's really old and I'm not even using it. It's deactivated, but it's still sitting there. It's still a potential vulnerability. And so that's your warning, that's your trigger to go, maybe we should go delete that plugin if we're not going to use it. Or we're using this one, it's out of date. We need to go make sure we go update that one. One of the things that I have to do here at the university is when I am alerted to WordPress sites is to scan them and say, okay, where are you at as far as security? Where are you at as far as locking down this site? And then taking those reports and going back to those site owners and saying, okay, look, you've got 15 plugins that are out of date. We've got to make sure we update all 15 of those. Plus, are you using all those? And if you're not, let's go in and let's get rid of the ones you're not using because they're still vulnerable.
So how often are you going through and scanning these sites that you're in charge of? I mean, I know that I have Google Analytics set up to where every month I get a report, a whole bunch of custom reports that I set up. Can you have custom reports sent to you or alerts sent to you, email to you on a monthly basis? Or
so these tools are not, I'm trying to think of a good way to say it. They are more for the technically inclined. They're almost all command line terminal-based tools. So you could certainly automate those. You could set up bash scripts to run those and have reports done, but there's not a nice GUI interface. They are a bit more in-depth. They're not difficult to run. I mean, if you're okay in the command line, in a terminal, they're super easy to use once you understand how they're used, once you understand how they work. But setting up automation like that, you could do it, but it would take a little bit of terminal expertise, let's put it that way.
So for someone that is not, I haven't had a lot of exposure to that, to be honest, and it is part of my job to go through and monitor the security and look at our site and see how susceptible things are, as well as analytics. So if I put one of those modules into our Drupal site and then went back and looked at it on a monthly basis and said, all right, here's where there's opportunities for us to improve, would that just put a little reminder and then just read the code, I should be okay, right?
Yes, absolutely. And if you can't, if that's just part of your responsibilities, but you don't have the time or the inclination, there are companies that will do this for us, that will provide that monitoring, that scanning for us on a continuous basis to let you know that, hey, you got these problems, as well as blocking some of that incoming traffic that's probing those systems. So there are companies available to do that for us, which is, and I know HigherEd doesn't have a lot of money, but as far as how much would it cost to send you to the training or to give you the time to learn it versus the 10 or 15 bucks a month it might cost to have them scan and watch stuff.
Versus how much would it cost if we gave out a whole bunch of students' data because all of our stuff is susceptible, and that's one of the harder parts as far as security goes in HigherEd is there is no return of investment immediately on security. It's not like you spend I'm going to say 100,000, but let's say you spend $100,000 on security. You're not going to see a $100,000 return immediately. You're never going to, in fact, if they did their job right, you're never going to see a return. It's like only insurance. If you get, right. It's like insurance, perfect example. It's exactly like insurance. You're not going to see that return. You're only going to realize that you wish you had it once you're compromised. Yeah, you can't go to the doctor and be like, my appendix is bursting, I'm having this emergency. Oh, that's going to be $80,000.
Right, yeah, exactly. You have to think of it in terms of, would I rather spend a couple of $1 million because I've leaked all these people's data, or spend the money up front and actually do some security work to fix and also secure these things and put up some of those layers?
And you're exactly right. In HigherEd, there's so many different layers of data that we have up there. I mean, there's so many different ways in which people can be susceptible to have their information stolen and taken. And
right.
Holy cow.
And I don't know about where you work. I know at the university we're very decentralized, and there are a lot of silos. And one of the first things you should do when you're doing security assessments is an inventory. Like, you should know, what do we have? Where is it? Who's in charge of it? What does it contain? And in these decentralized systems, it's almost impossible to do. Like, in fact, we get this question a lot: how many websites does the University of Missouri have? I can't answer that.
Yeah.
I can't. I can give you a range. I know it's somewhere between 1,500 and 1,800.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the best I can do. We don't even have an inventory of websites. So I can't even imagine trying to be in charge of security for a campus and inventory what databases there are and what data they contain, what servers there are, and what information they contain, and just all the different components, the networking aspect of what are all the endpoints in the network, what systems are connecting to all these points in the network.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge undertaking. But unfortunately for our industry, we're going to have to make that change, or we are going to become extremely vulnerable to these massive attacks and then be paying millions of dollars in fines and fees and PR, if nothing else, PR, trying to fix our reputation.
Yeah, I mean, just as you're saying that, I'm thinking when I started at the University of Virginia and I was interviewing one of the webmasters and marketing experts, Zach Wheat, who's amazing, said the University of Virginia, everyone kind of does their own thing because the founder of the university wrote the Declaration of Independence. So I'm like, ha, that's hilarious. Of course, everyone wants to be independent.
Yes.
And even you're exactly right. When I was at the University of Michigan, I wanted to just get a list of all the websites that existed for just the health system. Yep. And so many different docs are like, well, I work in this, skin cancer office, but I also want to make my own website for, this. And I know that we have our own research, but like, I'm going to make my own. So it's like, you're trying to go through and piecemeal and bring stuff together and trying to get people to agree to put it all in one spot. And who knows, like, what they may have gotten special approval on to be able to get access to and put their additional information in, and yikes.
Yeah. And the legacy systems are a big deal. I mean, we just don't have money. So these systems are built 10, 15 years ago, and then nobody touches them again because they're running. But the landscape that we face now is a completely different landscape than we had 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean,
we got Pokemon Go.
Tough.
We didn't have that 10, 15 years ago.
This is true. We do have Pokemon Go now.
So it sounds like the overall strategy of what we need to do is put everything underneath. So have everything organized. Put everything underneath one big server, one big cloud, whatever you want to call it. Put everything organized, all the different websites, and it would also consolidate resources. It would make us so much more efficient if we were all on one CMS and we were all using one
absolutely,
or one group of themes, or whatever. And then from there, it'd be a lot easier to monitor what information's going in, what information's going out, all of the security.
Yes. And that's something that my group has been pushing forward on our campus, is that type of system where, hey, if we're going to do a CMS, let's at least agree on maybe 2 CMSs instead of 10 different CMSs, so that we can begin to work together to say, okay, let's vet some plugins and let's have it limited to 10 plugins so that we know we only have to monitor these 10 plugins for any potential vulnerabilities that are disclosed. Because right now, I couldn't even tell you who's running WordPress on this campus. I don't have an exhaustive list. So if a vulnerability comes out for, let's say, in WordPress core, I don't even know who to contact right now at this point. I've got a collection of people that I would know I would need to contact, but I don't have an exhaustive list. So even on my campus, I can't get in hold of everybody that has it. So you're right. If we could get everybody to kind of come together and to work up those economies of scale, it would be much easier to secure, because then we would know what we have, we would know what pieces we're working with, and then we could come up with strategies and policies that ensure that security has been taken and has at least been brought into the conversation and thought of.
Wow, that's a really good point. So going back, we have the good optimal, like, this is what the solution should be. Let's start at the immediate. Let's say my site gets, hacked and malware has been put on my site. What do I need to do? Like, what can I do? What would you recommend my first steps are, and who I should notify, and what I need to?
Well, I would definitely, I'm assuming you have an information security office of some sort. So that would be my first contact, is contact them, because they're going to need to go into the system and do some analysis. They're probably going to want to take a snapshot of the server so they can go back and look at the logs and try to figure out how it happened. Hopefully your information security office also has a remediation team that would either do the cleanup or at least assist you with the cleanup. For those places that don't have a security office, Again, there's companies that'll help you come in and do this, but they're not always the cheapest. They're not all of them are super expensive, but depending on the severity of the compromise, it can cost you quite a bit of money. And again, it's back to like that insurance analogy. It's if you're fixing it after the fact, it's going to be a lot more expensive than if you just put the resources into it from the beginning. Now, me personally, I happen to find remediation and triage extremely interesting. So I like getting, and that's one of the things I do at the universities for WordPress at least, is when there is a compromised WordPress site, after we've taken that snapshot, I go back in and begin to analyze and find where the compromises have happened, and then start working with them to clean those up. So I happen to like it. So my answer would be, well, I'm going to get into the terminal. I'm going to start going through and doing some prep and looking for stuff. For those that aren't, definitely get in touch with your security office and then work closely with them to figure out what happened and get that stuff cleaned up. The other thing you might do is, depending on how your system is set up or your university is set up, is contact the server people to take that site offline immediately. Wow. So that you're not sending out whatever it was that you're compromised with.
That's a really good call. So any last advice for anyone that is tuning in on this topic? Oh, wait, we do have a question coming from Eric Hagan. Thank you, Eric, for following along and all of your tweeting. If you don't have a dedicated security position, should this be a collaboration between all developers and system admins?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say even if you do have a security officer, you should have collaboration with all your developers and admins. Because one of the things that you really need to do is, again, secure that entire stack. Everything from the applications, the database, to the operating system, the whole stack. And it's hard to do that. You can't usually do that as one person because you have different silos. So having that communication between the sysadmins and the developers is crucial. I've been in higher ed for 16 years. One of the things I've seen is sysadmins have no idea what programmers do. Programmers often have no idea what sysadmins do. There's gaps there. So to foster that collaboration, you're only going to get a benefit if you guys can come together and talk and see what each other's working on and how those pieces interact. Only good things will happen. Definitely, if you don't have a security officer, if you don't have a security position, certainly begin working together. Look at the OWASP top 10. Start trying to go through some of the training they provide online. Most cities, there are hundreds of OWASP local chapters. So look at OWASP, see if there's a local chapter. If there is, definitely get in touch with those people, see when their next meeting is, because you can go there and begin to ask questions of those members, and they can most likely kind of either assist you in beginning to understand what the OWASP, I keep saying OWASP, and I didn't explain what it means. OWASP is the open, I should have said that, my apologies. So OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. It's a nonprofit organization, it's international, and its whole focus is to raise software security, the level of software security through awareness and education. So they sponsor all these hundreds, thousands of chapters throughout the world, with well over 100 in the US. And again, funnel money to these chapters to provide education, provide awareness to everybody that's doing development. So if you have a chapter, definitely get in touch with them, do that. If you don't, the OWASP site, it's owasp.org, provides a ton of resources on how to secure things, what those vulnerabilities are, what those big risks are that we're seeing out in the industry, and how to protect yourself against those. So yeah, I'd get your devs, your sysadmins together to collaborate, start going over that OWASP stuff, because there's components for everybody. There's going to be components for sysadmins on what they need to do to their systems to secure them. There's going to be pieces for the developers on to what to do for the web application and those application layers. So absolutely, collaboration is always good. I can't think of a bad situation from collaboration.
Yeah, and going along with that, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of sites for the different CMSs, but I know for a fact in Drupal, there's a giant online community that's like, hey, we found this, and be aware that this is susceptible, or, there's consistent feeds where you can be just kind of looking at them, even just in the morning as you're drinking your coffee and getting settled, just like you check your emails, check that and see if there's any vulnerabilities or things you need to be aware of. And you also can get on mailing lists, and I've got an email head up of, heads up, the security patch need to be put in place because of this. And it made things a lot easier in management.
And if you're a one-man band or one-person band, I should say, and you're having to do it all yourself, do what you're talking about. Subscribe to some of those, look for exploit databases and subscribe to those. Set up some Google alerts for the plugins that you're using. with the keywords of exploit or vulnerability to
That's a
kind
good
of give
idea.
you those warnings that things are coming in, or at least Google is crawling and finding things that match that, to kind of give yourself that heads up, especially if you're kind of siloed and by yourself. And even if you are siloed, I'd recommend reaching out into your community and see if there's community groups around web development or around whatever CMS you're using. Because most likely, unless you're in a small town, if you're in a town of any size, there's probably a community of other developers in those CMSs, in those systems, that want to get together and collaborate. Because again, collaboration is always going to foster better ideas and just helping each other out. Just collaborate as much as possible.
Yeah, and backing you up on that, in every place I've ever lived, the small and the big, there's been, if you just go to meetup.com and look at, what are folks that are, what are groups doing this? And then also on Facebook, just looking at local events that are coming up and what are different groups that are getting together. And even if you're on Drupal and they're on WordPress, going there and kind of hearing about some of the patterns and learning about something else can do nothing but benefit you. And Eric, I will say, at every university I've ever worked with, all of my tech, the system admins and the developers, one of the best ways to get everybody together is food. So if you can start off and say, hey, everybody, I've got cupcakes or chips and dip or whatever, and just say like, yeah, they don't want to go to another meeting, but getting them out of their office and, rewarding them with food, as I find that to be very effective. Yes. Men and women alike, everyone likes food.
Everybody likes food. And if you can try to come up with like one immediate takeaway to share in whatever conversation that happens, just one thing that you can say, hey, if you go back and just do this one simple thing, it'll fix this, or it'll protect this, or it'll add at least one more layer. So just give them that one little, I think they called it a golden nugget at HigherEdWeb this year. Like just give them that one little golden nugget. So combine the food with that one golden nugget, and you're probably going to be able to hook people into those further conversations in those next meetings.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for all of your insight and all of your advice. And thank you to those who have tuned in. Is there anything extra at the very end that you want us to leave us with?
Oh, let's see. Just, again, check out OWASP. If you're interested in security at all, if you are in charge of these things, definitely check out OWASP. Go through the top 10. Reach out to me. I would love to help out and answer any questions. I'm super easy to find online. There's only about 10 Gilzos in the U.S., so if you search for my last name, you're going to find either me or my dad or my brother or somebody that's related to me that gets you back in touch with me. So, just keep thinking. Whenever you're developing, think about security first. Don't try to bolt it on at the end.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your help, Paul. This was
Thanks
awesome.
for having me. I loved it.
Yeah, and thank you always to our program sponsor, mStoner. And thank you for joining us today. You can find out more shows from Higher Ed Pros on higheredlive.com, and we will see you next time.